The sky over Colony 12 was always gray. Filled with smoke and dust from the factories, most humans kept their heads down, focused on work, and ignored the darker corners of the city. But not Jake. He walked slower than others, noticing things. He was a maintenance engineer, quiet, alone, and always carrying a small bag of tools. That day, as he walked past the waste yard, he saw something move near a pile of metal scraps. At first, he thought it was a wild animal. The thing crawled on all fours, digging through garbage. Its skin was covered in dirt, and its clothes were nothing more than torn rags. It grabbed a half-eaten food packet and shoved it into its mouth, chewing fast, like it might be taken away. The guards nearby laughed, throwing stones at it. "Stupid alien mutt," one said. "Eats better than it deserves." Jake stopped walking, watching the creature, and then it turned its head. It wasn't an animal. It was a girl, a young alien girl, maybe 10 or 11 years old. Her face was smeared with dust, but her eyes bright, golden, and wide-locked with Jake's. For a second, everything else disappeared. The noise, the stink, the shouting yet faded, because in that moment, he saw something in her eyes that no one else cared to see. Fear, yes, but also pride. And something more. He moved forward, but she hissed at him like a cornered animal and ran. She disappeared behind the dumpsters, slipping into a crack between buildings. Jake didn't follow, but he didn't forget either. The next day, he came back. He stood near the same pile of trash, holding a wrapped food packet and a clean bottle of water. He placed it on the ground and walked away. From a distance, he waited. An hour passed. Finally, the girl peeked out from the shadows. Crawling low, she sniffed the air, looked around, then took the food and water and vanished again. This became a routine. Jake returned every day at the same time. He never spoke, never got too close. He just left food and watched her take it. Over the next few days, he noticed more. She never stood up straight, always crawled, as if afraid to be seen upright. Her hands were scratched and bleeding, her knees covered in old bruises. She didn't wear shoes, and her feet looked like they had walked over broken glass. One rainy afternoon, he left a small blanket with the food. She didn't take it. The next day, the blanket was still there, soaked and muddy, but the food was gone. Jake sighed, realizing she didn't trust anything that didn't look like food. So the next day, he tried something different. He brought warm soup in a sealed container. He sat down near the trash pile, opened the container, and began to eat slowly. He placed another container next to him and waited. After some time, she appeared, her eyes focused on the soup. Jake didn't move. He took a spoonful, smiled, and then pointed at the second container. She crawled closer, inch by inch, like a scared animal. Finally, she grabbed the container and pulled back fast, hiding behind a bin. Jake didn't chase her. He just kept eating quietly. That night, Jake couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about her. Who was she? Where were her parents? Why was no one helping her? He had seen many aliens in Colony 12, but none treated this badly. Even the lower workers had beds and shelters, but this girl had nothing. He decided to follow her the next day when she came. For the food, Jake waited until she ran away with it. Then he silently followed her. She slipped through alleys, climbed over pipes, and entered a broken factory building. Jake waited outside for a while, then slowly stepped inside, careful not to make noise. Inside was dark, cold, and filled with old machines. He heard soft sounds breathing, shuffling the clink of metal. When his eyes adjusted, he saw her. She sat on the floor, eating with her back against the wall. Her ankle was chained to a large pipe. She wasn't living there by choice. She was imprisoned. Jake's heart pounded. She saw him, dropped the food, and covered her face, expecting pain. But Jake didn't move closer. He knelt and placed a flashlight on the floor, aiming it toward her gently. Now he could see clearly. Her arms were thin as sticks, her ribs visible. Her face was tired, but still had a strange beauty hidden under the dirt. And then he saw the faint lines on her skin, under the grime tattoos. Not random ones, but delicate, royal patterns, partly burned and scratched off. That moment, Jake understood. She wasn't just some stray alien. She was something else. Something important, and someone had tried to erase it. Jake didn't sleep that night, even after returning to his small apartment. The girl's image stayed in his mind, her golden eyes, her trembling hands. The rusty chain locked to her anklet haunted him. He kept asking himself, why is no one helping her? Who put her there? And worst of all, how long has she lived like that? The next morning, he returned to the abandoned factory. This time, he brought tools, not just food. A small cutting torch, lockpick set, and a basic medkit were tucked inside his bag. He walked carefully through the broken walls and rusty beams. And when he stepped into the same dark corner, she was gone. Panic hit him. The chains were still there. Hanging from the pipe, the food bowl he had left yesterday was lying upside down. Untouched, Jake looked around, calling softly, "Hey, little one, it's me." The human, no answer came, only silence and dripping water echoing from a pipe overhead. Then, from the shadows, a low hiss. Jake turned and saw her crouched behind an old cabinet. Her face was wild again, filled with fear, but her eyes still had that spark. He slowly knelt and set the medkit and food on the ground. "I brought help, not harm," he said quietly. She didn't move, but she didn't run either. Jake sat down across the room, making sure not to scare her. "I saw the chain," he said, more to himself than to her. "You're not a wild animal. You're a prisoner." The girl's lips parted slightly, like she wanted to speak. But no words came, only a soft growl. He opened the food container and pushed it forward. Inch by inch, she crawled out slowly, her hands shaking, and grabbed it. She ate like always, fast. Desperate, but her eyes stayed locked on him. Jake reached for the chain near the pipe. She froze and dropped the food, her whole body trembling. "It's okay," Jake whispered. "I'm not going to hurt you." He pulled out the small torch and began cutting the metal slowly. Sparks flew, and the air smelled of burning rust. But the girl didn't move. After a few minutes, the chain snapped. Jake held up the broken end to show her, "You're free." Now, she looked down at her ankle, then back at him. She didn't smile, didn't speak, but tears formed in her glowing eyes. Jake opened the medkit and gently held out a wipe. "Can I clean your wounds?" he asked softly. To his surprise, she crawled closer, still scared, still tense, but she let him touch her arm. Her skin was covered in old cuts, some infected, others scarred. He worked slowly, speaking in a calm voice. As he cleaned the blood and dirt, he noticed more of the faint tattoos. They were delicate lines that curled and shimmered faintly under the grime. He remembered reading about them in alien culture, especially among the Volteri race. Only nobles had those markings. They were not ink. They were grown into the skin with biolite. It's almost impossible to remove. Someone had tried to burn hers off, but traces remained. Jake looked at her, amazed. "You're not just some abandoned kid," he murmured. "You were someone important." She blinked, confused, and whispered the first word he had ever heard from her lips. "Raya." Jake leaned forward. "Raya," he repeated gently. "Is that your name?" She nodded slowly, her eyes still wet. He smiled softly. "Raya. I'm Jake." For the first time, she didn't flinch when he reached out. Her hand touched his, not strong or firm, but like a leaf landing in an open palm. He gave her a blanket, wrapped it around her, and told her, "You can come with me, if you want." But she shook her head quickly. eyes wide with fear. "No. Bad people come," she whispered, voice hoarse. Jake frowned. "Who?" She didn't answer, only pulled the blanket tighter and stared at the door. Jake understood. Someone still watched this place, someone dangerous. He stayed with her a little longer, told her stories about Earth, about food that came from clean kitchens, not trash piles, about soft beds, pets, books, and laughter. She listened with wide eyes, her mouth slightly open, like she couldn't believe such a world existed, and maybe for her it never had. When night came, Jake stood up to leave. "I'll come back tomorrow," he promised. She stared at him, and then, very quietly, she asked, "You not leave forever?" Jake shook his head. "Never." He walked out of the factory with a heavy heart, because now he knew this wasn't just about feeding a hungry child. This was about protecting someone the world had thrown away. And deep in his gut, Jake felt a warning. If someone had chained her there, they would come back to finish the job. But Jake wasn't going to let that happen, not as long as he was breathing. Jake came back the next morning. His legs were sore from walking, and his eyes had dark circles from a sleepless night. But he didn't care. All that mattered was checking on the little alien girl, Rhea, the one who ate like an animal but had the heart of a princess, even if she didn't know it yet. He stepped into the abandoned factory and called gently, "Rhea, it's me." Silence. Then, soft footsteps echoed from the shadows. She peeked out from behind a beam, still wrapped in the same dirty blanket. Her golden eyes looked at him, and this time there was no growl, no hiss, just curiosity. Jake smiled and held up a small bag. "I brought something for you." He sat down and pulled out a bottle of clean water, some fresh fruit, and a soft piece of bread. Rhea came closer. Still crawling on her hands and knees, Jake frowned. "You can walk now, the chain's gone." She paused, looked at her foot, then back at him, confused. It was like she had forgotten how to walk upright. "Try," Jake said, standing slowly and reaching out a hand. She stared at it like it was fire, but then her small hand reached out and touched his. He gently pulled, helping her stand. Her legs wobbled, unused to standing straight, but she stood just for a second. She smiled, just a little, and sat back down. Jake chuckled softly. "That's a good start," as she ate. Jake opened a small device, a scanner he used at work. He had secretly adjusted it to detect biomarkings. He aimed it at her arm while pretending to adjust something else. The screen flashed a soft light and beeped. What it showed made his heart skip a beat. Royal markings detected. Valtari genetic line status burned. But Trace Balje stared at the screen, stunned. Valtari, that name wasn't just known, it was famous. The Valtari were a noble alien family that once ruled entire star sectors. Their bloodline was ancient, respected, even feared, but they were thought to be extinct after a civil war, and now, sitting in front of him, chewing a slice of fruit, was a little girl with royal Valtari blood. Jake cleared his throat. "Rhea," she looked up, blinking. "Do you remember?" "Family." Her smile vanished, and her eyes dropped. "Long ago," she whispered. "Big house, shiny floors, tall windows." Jake leaned closer. "What happened?" Her lips trembled. "Fire. Screams. Men came with masks." She hugged her knees tightly. "Mother said hide. Then they took me." Jake felt a wave of anger rise inside him. He wanted to scream, to break something, but instead he stayed calm. "They hurt you?" Rhea nodded slowly. "Burned my skin. Said I'm no princess now." Jake's jaw tightened. They had tried to erase her past, destroy her future. But they hadn't taken her eyes. They were still gold, pure Valtari gold. No one could fake that. "You are a princess," Jake said firmly. "No matter what they did." She blinked at him like she didn't understand. "No crown." She said softly, "No home." Jake pointed at her chest. You still have your heart. That afternoon, Jake brought her a soft shirt and pants. Nothing fancy, but clean and warm. She looked at them, confused. You want me to wear this? Jake smiled. Yes, it's yours. She looked at her rags, then the new clothes. With slow hands, she changed, and when she stood up in the simple human outfit, something changed in the air. She no longer looked like a scrap-heating creature. She looked like a small, lost queen. Jake had an idea. He took out an old mirror and placed it in front of her. Look, he said. Raya gasped. She hadn't seen herself in years. She touched her face, her short, tangled hair, the marks on her arms, but then her eyes locked onto her own reflection. Those glowing gold eyes. She stepped back, surprised. I look like... Jake nodded, like royalty. Later that evening, they sat together in silence. The sun's rays slipped through the broken windows, painting the floor in soft light. Raya leaned against Jake's arm. Tired, but peaceful, he looked at her and whispered, I think they're still looking for you. She didn't move, just whispered back, I know. Jake tightened his grip on his bag. I'll protect you. She looked up, eyes calm. You already are, but outside, deep in the shadows of the alley. A cloaked figure watched them. He tapped a small device and whispered into it. We found the girl. His voice was low, dangerous. Prepared the team. Asterisk, the wind howled. Outside, as Jake tightened the lock on his apartment door, he looked back and saw Raya sitting quietly on the couch. She held a warm cup of soup with both hands, sipping carefully. The blanket he gave her was wrapped around her shoulders like a royal cloak, but even with warmth, food, and safety, Jake could see if she was scared. Not of him, but of something else. Something out there, hunting in the dark. Jake checked the window, pulling the curtain tight. The feeling hadn't left him since the moment he saw that figure outside the factory. He had felt it, a pair of cold eyes watching, and now he knew whoever took Raya before, whoever burned her markings and chained her like an animal, they were back. Raya's voice broke the silence. Are they coming? Jake turned around, surprised by the question. She wasn't looking at him, just staring into her soup. He nodded slowly. I think so. She gave a small sigh. Not of fear, but of exhaustion. I always knew. She whispered, they don't. Forget. Jake sat beside her. Do you know who they are? She nodded. The black crest. Jake frowned. What's that? They are shadows, she said. They destroyed my home. They said my blood was dangerous. Jake didn't understand it all, but he understood enough. If her bloodline was royal, it meant power. Maybe even a right to claim something land. A throne leadership that meant enemies and dangerous ones. And now she was in his home. He stood up and opened a hidden panel in the wall. Inside was his emergency supply tools, gadgets, and a small energy pistol. He had never used it before. But tonight felt different. He turned to her. If they come, I'll stop them. Raya didn't answer, but her eyes followed every move he made. He could see it again. She didn't fully believe anyone would fight for her. Not after everything, but he would. That night, Jake didn't sleep. He stayed near the window, watching, waiting. At 2 a.m., the street outside went quiet, too quiet. The usual sounds of late-night machines and distant chatter were gone. Then he saw them, 3 figures in dark armor, walking without sound. They moved like ghosts, scanning doors and windows with small devices. Jake's heart pounded. He turned and whispered, hide, now. Raya rushed to the small space under the floor hatch. He had prepared it earlier, just in case. She crawled inside, curled up, and looked at him with wide eyes. Don't let them take me, she whispered. Jake placed a hand on her head. I won't. Then he closed the hatch and covered it with the rug. A moment later, bang. The front door exploded inward. 3 masked intruders stormed in, weapons raised. Jake stood in front of them, holding the pistol with both hands. "She's not here," he said firmly. One of the men stepped forward, tall, with a black crest. On his chest a snake wrapped around a crown. "We know she's here, human," the man said coldly. "Step aside." Jake didn't move. "She's under my protection." The man laughed. "Protection? She's a product, not a person." That was enough. Jake fired. The blast hit one intruder in the chest. He fell, groaning. The others rushed forward. Jake ducked, swinging a metal pipe from the wall and hitting the second attacker hard. But the third tackled him. They crashed onto the floor, Jake's head hitting the wall. The pistol slid across the room. The masked man punched him in the ribs. "Where is she?" Jake spat blood and smiled. Too late. The attacker stood and turned, but the floor hatch had already opened. Raya stood there, her golden eyes glowing in the dim light. She held the pistol in both shaking hands. The man raised his weapon. But she fired first, a perfect shot to the shoulder, sending him crashing into the wall. Jake stared at her, breathless. She stood straight, not crawling anymore, no longer a scared animal. She looked like something else entirely, a princess reborn. Jake crawled to her side and took the weapon. "We need to go, now," he said. She nodded. And together they limped out the back door and disappeared into the night. Outside the colony limits, they found shelter in an old transit station. Jake sealed the door and collapsed on a bench. Raya sat beside him, her hands still shaking. "I hurt someone," she whispered. Jake looked at her. "You saved us." She didn't speak for a long time. Then finally, "No more hiding," she said. Jake raised an eyebrow. She looked up at him with those glowing gold eyes. "I'm ready to be who I was born to be." And in that quiet moment, Jake realized this wasn't just about saving a child. It was about restoring a legacy, and it had just begun. The old transit station was cold, broken, and forgotten by most of the colony. But for Jake and Raya, it was the safest place they had. No guards, no patrols, no curious eyes. Just silence, rusted walls, and a roof that didn't leak when it rained. Raya sat by the corner, her back against the wall. She stared at the small flame Jake had built, using a heat unit and scrap metal. Her hands were wrapped around a mug of broth, warm and clean. She didn't drink it right away. She just held it like it was something too rare to waste. Jake sat across from her, breathing slowly. His ribs still hurt from the fight, and his face had bruises, but none of that mattered. Raya was safe for now. He studied her carefully. She was different today, not just because she had fought back, not just because she stood tall, but because her eyes had changed. They weren't just scared anymore. They were awake, alive, and something deep inside was rising. He spoke softly. "You were brave." Raya didn't answer right away. She looked into the fire, then finally whispered, "I didn't want to be brave." Jake nodded. "No one ever does." She shifted her body slowly, sitting more upright. "I just didn't want to be taken again." Jake replied, "You won't be, I promise." There was silence for a while. Then she asked, "Why? Do you care?" Jake blinked, not expecting the question. He thought for a moment, then answered honestly. "Because when I saw you, I saw a child, not a creature." Others looked away. Raya said, "You didn't." Jake smiled softly. "Because you looked back." He pulled something from his bag, a small, folded piece of cloth. "I found this yesterday." "Ah," he said, unfolding it. It was an old scarf, deep purple with golden threads. Faded, but still beautiful. Raya's eyes widened. I had one like that," she whispered. Jake nodded. "It belonged to your people, didn't it?" She took it carefully, running her fingers across the fabric. Her eyes filled with tears again. But she didn't let them fall. Can we find out? Who I was? She asked suddenly. Jake sat up straight. Yes, we can try. I want to remember, she said. Not just the pain, but the good. Jake reached for his datapad and opened files from the Galactic Archive. I already started. Searching. There are reports from 10 years ago civil war on the Valtari homeworld. Royal family attacked. Some escaped, Raya whispered. That was us. Jake showed her a picture. Old and grainy. It showed a Valtari woman standing with a child beside a glowing fountain. The child had golden eyes, just like Raya. Raya stared at it, then reached out and touched the screen. That's my mother, for a moment. The room was filled with emotion. Jake didn't speak. He let her feel it, pain, hope, memory, all mixed together. Then he said, "You are the last of your line, Raya." She nodded slowly. Then, I must live like it. The next few days passed in quiet healing. Jake taught her how to clean wounds, how to eat slowly, how to sleep without fear. They built a small bed using crates and soft insulation foam. He gave her old clothes from when his niece visited. Sweater, shoes, gloves. She looked strange in human clothes, but also powerful, like someone rebuilding themselves piece by piece. He showed her how to use a datapad, how to read human language. She was smart, quick to learn. One night, he gave her a comb and said, "Try to untangle your hair." She did, slowly and painfully, and afterwards she said, "It feels like mine again," on the 7th day. Raya stood by the cracked mirror in the corner of the station. She had cleaned herself. Dressed in a dark green tunic Jake found in a trader's box. The scarf was tied around her waist like a royal sash. She looked different. No longer the broken girl who ate from trash, but not yet a queen either. Something in between. Jake approached, holding a small badge. It was a communicator, modified with tracking blocker and emergency beacon. "I want you to keep this," he said. "If anything happens, press this button and I'll come." Raya took it carefully. "Thank you." They stepped outside for fresh air. The colony lights were far in the distance, glowing like stars. Raya looked up at the sky. "Do you think the stars remember me?" Jake looked at her. "I think they waited for you to look up again." Then she asked something that made him stop. "What now?" Jake breathed deep. "We find allies, people who believe in justice, and we help you become who you were always meant to be, a princess." Jake shook his head. "No, something stronger. A survivor who became a leader." Raya looked up again, the stars shining in her golden eyes. And for the first time in her life, she believed it was possible. Asterisk, the sun rose over the colony with a soft orange light. For most people, it was just another day of work, dust, and tired footsteps. But for Jake and Raya, this day was different. It was the day she would stop hiding. Jake helped her adjust the scarf tied around her waist. It was still old and faded, but now it looked like something special. She wore a simple green tunic and boots, too big for her feet. Her golden eyes seemed even brighter under the morning light. She was nervous, her hands shaking slightly. But her back stayed straight. Her head high. "Are you sure?" Jake asked gently. Raya nodded. "I don't want to be afraid anymore." They walked down the broken path, toward the colony center. People passed by, glancing at them. Some stared at Ryamabi, recognizing her strange eyes, or maybe just curious. Jake walked beside her, silent but protective. He had told her she didn't have to do this. She had made the choice. She wanted to be seen. They reached the market area, loud with voices, full of smells, spices, oil, sweat. Raya flinched at the noise but didn't stop walking. Jake noticed 2 guards staring at them from across the road. He leaned close, whispering, "Ignore them." Raya nodded, her lips pressed tight as they moved through the crowd. Jake saw familiar faces, people he had worked with. Others who had laughed when he fed the trash eater. Now they whispered, "That's the girl. Why is she with him?" Her eyes, they glow. Raya kept walking, one step at a time. Then they stopped at a small open square with a platform in the middle. It was used for public speeches, announcements, and sometimes punishments. Jake stepped up first and spoke loudly. "I want to say something." People turned, curious. Jake continued, "This girl you ignored, the one you threw scraps at. Her name is Raya. She was chained, hidden like a beast, but she is not a beast. She is a survivor." Raya stepped up next to him. Her legs trembled slightly, but her voice came out clear. "I was a princess once," she said, "before my home was burned, before my family was taken." Some people laughed, others gasped. Raya didn't stop. "They tried to erase me, to make me forget who I am. But this human, he saw me. He gave me food, shelter, and my name back." There was silence. Then one woman near the front said, "She's just a child." Jake replied, "A child who's been through more than most adults here." Another voice shouted, "Why should we care?" Jake looked around the crowd, his voice calm but firm. "Because how we treat the weak shows who we really are." The guards began to step forward. But someone else blocked him. It was Lena, Jake's old friend, the doctor. She raised her hand. "Let the girl speak." She stepped closer and said to the crowd, "I've seen her injuries, the scars, the tattoos. She is Valtari." Gasps spread like wildfire. "Valtari? The royal bloodline. I thought they were extinct." Raya took a deep breath and lifted her sleeve. The faint royal markings still shimmered beneath her skin. Someone knelt in the crowd, bowing slightly. Others followed. Slowly, one by one, Jake stood by her side. Stunned, he hadn't expected this, not so soon, but he realized something. People needed a symbol, something to believe in, and Raya? She had become that. Later that day, they met in Lena's clinic. Lena closed the door and said, "You both made enemies today." Jake nodded. "We already had them." Lena placed a data chip on the table. "This contains old Valtari records." She said, "Family history, royal codes, legal rights." Raya picked it up, her hands steady. She didn't say anything, but her eyes glowed with quiet fire. "We'll need protection," Jake said. Ali's Lena nodded. "I can help contact the outer colonies. There are still people who remember the Valtari with respect." Jake looked at Raya. "You ready for this?" She looked at both of them and said softly, "I was born ready. I just forgot for a while." That night, Jake sat on the rooftop of the clinic. Looking at the stars, Raya sat beside him, wrapped in a clean blanket. "Today was big," he said. "Yes," she replied, "but it's only the beginning." Jake smiled. "You sound like a real leader now." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You sound like someone I can trust." And above them, the stars kept shining, not because they remembered her, but because she had found her light again. The stars above Colony 12 were bright that night. The air was still, almost like the world itself was holding its breath. Inside the clinic, Jake sat at a metal desk, adjusting the small communicator Raya now wore around her neck. It had been 1 week since she stood on the platform and told the world who she really was. And everything had changed since then. Messages came from outer colonies, aliens, traitors, and even some human leaders who remembered the Valtari name. Some wanted to help, some wanted answers, and some wanted her dead. Jake looked across the room where Raya stood near the window. She wore clean clothes now, and her once tangled hair had been brushed and tied neatly. But it was her eyes that had changed the most. They no longer looked down. They stared ahead, bright, sharp, full of purpose. Lena entered the room, holding a datapad. "There's a shuttle landing outside the border," she said. "Unknown ID codes, masked signals." Jake stood up fast. Them? Lena nodded. Most likely, Raya didn't flinch. They came before. She said softly, and I ran. Jake turned to her. Not this time. Outside. The colony was quiet, but tension filled the air. A group of citizens had gathered. Near the edge of the market square, guards were ready, but nervous. The air shimmered slightly and then the shuttle landed with a heavy thud. The Black Crest mercenaries had returned. The door hissed open, and out stepped 4 armed figures in dark armor. The leader removed his helmet, revealing the same cold eyes that had stormed Jake's home. "We've come for the girl," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She belongs to us." Raya stepped forward before Jake could stop her. She stood in the open, her golden eyes glowing in the light of the rising sun. "I belong to no one," she said, her voice calm. "I am Raya of the Volturi line." The leader laughed. "You are a forgotten mistake, nothing more." Jake stepped beside her, holding his energy pistol in hand. "She's more than that," he said. "She's a survivor, a symbol, and the last princess of her kind." The crowd behind them was silent, but watching closely, the mercenaries raised their weapons. Jake tightened his grip, but then something unexpected happened. From the crowd, a group of aliens stepped forward. Traders, engineers, mothers, and workers, all once silent, now standing tall, one by one. They stepped in front of Raya and Jake. No weapons, just bodies, a living shield. "You'll have to go through all of us," one said. "She gave us hope," said another. "She reminded us who we are," the mercenary leader growled. "You dare stand against us for her?" An old alien woman stepped forward, her eyes filled with fire. "We kneel for our princess, not for you." The leader raised his blaster, pointing straight at Raya. Jake moved to block it, but the shot never came. From above, a small drone zipped in and fired an electric pulse. The mercenary dropped to the ground, stunned. Others panicked. And more drones appeared from the sky. It was a defense system activated by Lena from the clinic. She had called for help hours ago. And now it had arrived. Within minutes, the attackers were disarmed, tied, and loaded into security pods. Cheers erupted across the square. The people hugged each other, some crying, some laughing. Jake turned to Raya, his chest heaving. "You all right?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, I'm more than all right." Later that day, a formal gathering was held in the council hall. For the first time in colony history, both humans and aliens sat together as equals. Jake stood to the side as Raya stepped onto the small stage. She wore the same scarf, now clean and neatly wrapped across her shoulders. She spoke without fear. "I am not here to demand a throne," she said. "I am here to build a future, one where no child is treated like trash, one where a human can see a princess in the dirt, and where kindness is stronger than power." The hall filled with applause. Jake felt a hand slip into his sleeve. Raya looked up at him with a small smile. "You didn't just save me," she whispered. "You reminded me who I am." Jake smiled. "I didn't see a princess at first." Raya raised an eyebrow. "No? I saw a girl who deserved better." She squeezed his hand. That was enough. Outside, the stars began to appear one by one. Raya stood on the balcony, her eyes reflecting their light. Behind her, the colony had changed slowly, painfully, beautifully. And beside her stood the one human who never saw her as an animal. He saw a lost child, a survivor, a daughter of royalty, and most of all, a princess.